This is Transparency, a podcast by Gender Dysphoria Alliance, hosted by Aaron Kimberly and Aaron Terrell. Each week we'll be joined by people who have personal or professional experience with gender dysphoria and physical transition. We'll also discuss how our trans experiences relate to the concept of gender identity. Join us for a compassionate yet heterodox approach to the question of trans.
All right, welcome back to Transparency, everyone. Today we're here talking to journalist and photographer Rod Fleming, who's currently based in the Philippines. Rod is well read on the research of transsexualism and has interviewed hundreds of transsexual women. In this episode, he gives us a fascinating glimpse into the lives of the Ladyboys of Southeast Asia, which is quite different from our Western concept of homosexuality and transgenderism. We hope you enjoyed this talk with Rod Fleming.
Yeah, that's fine. I got it. Because I was working for pharmaceutical companies, I can't really say which ones. I had a scientific education, but I really got to sharpen up my skills because I was being asked questions, by journalists that I had to be able to answer on behalf of these particular companies. So when I started getting interested in this subject, and it came about because I was writing a book, basically, I really started to look into the science, and because I was used to reading scientific papers. That's what I did. And at first, I was very confused, and now we're going back to about 2005 to 2007, I guess. And I was writing a book called the Warm Pink Jelly Express Train, which featured the lives of two Brazilians, well, one Brazilian and an American trans women. And I thought they were fascinating characters. So I was carrying out interviews over text. We didn't have this lovely system then where we could actually talk to people. You had to do it by, email and Skype was what we had.
Yeah.
So I was carrying out interviews like that. I speak very good French and I speak moderately good Spanish, or I did then. So I could just about get by in writing Portuguese. But most of the interviews were actually done through an interpreter who was an Italian girl. She found a lot of this really quite entertaining, A cute little innocent Italian Catholic girl was talking to these basically transsexual prostitutes all over the world on my behalf, and she was much entertained. She really was. Anyway, I wrote that, and I was still reading the science, and I got involved in reading Blanchard stuff because there was just something that didn't click. With the general, what's put out, the general, what's called the feminine essence theory, which is that we all have a certain, essential gender inside ourselves, and we instinctively know what that is, and that's what we are, and badab-dab-dab. And it just looked wrong. It just felt wrong. And when I went to the science, I found there was really no science to support that approach. The science all came from people like Zucker, Blanchard, Bailey, Kurt Freund, various others. There's a whole stack of them, obviously. And they were saying something completely different. They were saying that there were actually two different pathways into male to feminine trans expression, shall we call it? Yeah. So I thought, well, that's interesting. And at that point, I had begun coming to the Philippines. And at first, I didn't really see very much. And then for various reasons I don't need to go into, in 2015, I was kind of at a loose end here. And I was meeting a lot of girls. And mostly I was just taking them for dinner and talking to them, because I'm a journalist. That's what we do. You talk to people. And this was a fascinating experience because, I had all these personal stories and all this background and history. And it very much did back up what Ray Blanchard was saying, that there's these two completely separate pathways. A lot of what I saw here didn't exactly match what Blanchard had said. And I think this has caused a considerable number of problems in the West. But in general, it came down to this idea that there's not this weird, touchy-feely. What is it? If somebody says to you, do you feel like a man? What does that mean? If you ask me, do I feel like a man? I don't know what a man feels like. I know what I feel like. I know what it is to be me, but I don't know what it is to be you. I really don't, Aaron, and that's always the case. We cannot, Mike Bailey said this, you cannot know what it is to be someone else. That's impossible. If you cannot know what it is to be someone else, you can't adopt one of these strange, all-encompassing notions of gender. There has to be another cause. And the cause that Blanchard identified, and he was right, is sexuality. Right? That's what actually drives people. And if you think about it, that's obvious, because our purpose in being on this planet is to make little humans. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody does that, but by and large, that's what life does. It reproduces itself. And so when you look at it that way, it's not like some sort of some sort of prurient notion. It's just a simple, basic mechanism that life has, which it says, well, we have to arrange that certain kinds of people, and there are two, get together, right, in order to make babies. And evolution has done that very nicely in all species. What happens? So sexuality becomes really a fundamental thing. It's really basic and important, and Freud understood that completely. It's just unfortunate that Freud is not so popular these days, but so do most serious psychological researchers. They understand that you can't just turn your back on sexuality and pretend that it doesn't matter, or that people's sexuality is just basically one blanket thing. That can't be. There must be a reason, and there must be some recognizable way that this is expressed. And what you end up with if you do that, if you look at Blanchard, okay, and you say, right, there's two different types, which he calls HSTS, that's homosexual transsexual, and he called them autogynephilic transsexuals, which is autogynephilia is, by Blanchard, is a man's propensity to be sexually aroused by the thought or image of himself as a woman, right? So there's two different types. Actually, autogynephilia is incredibly complicated, and it really is a big, complicated thing. HSTS at first seems rather simple, but when you start getting into it, you go, wait a minute, this is not as simple as it looks. And it leads back to an idea which, the concept of HSTS leads back to an idea which appeared really in the 19th century. I think the originator, certainly the person who popularized the idea, was a German called Karl Heinrich Ulrichs, right? And the idea was called sexual inversion. He basically said, look, what we've got, when he was looking at homosexual males, right? And he was himself homosexual. He was strongly attracted to men. And he said, basically, men like me have got the same sexuality as women do. They're attracted to exactly the same kind of men. And that, therefore, must be some sort of innate sexual inversion. And Ulrich's point was that this was innate. It was not something you chose to be. It was something that that happened at some stage before you were born and just developed through your life. And subsequently, we've done tests which have really supported that idea, although nobody likes to talk about sexual inversion these days because it's highly unfashionable. But nevertheless, if you accept that HST is a thing, then you kind of have to go back and say, well, that's where it has to start, because we know that the HSTS, for example, will present it between 24 and 30 months. Well, it kind of has to be innate. And homosexual males always say, I've always been like this. This is me. This is how I've always been. And so that has to suggest an innate cause rather than an environmental cause, which is the Freudian approach. And Freud would say, it's something that happened in your childhood. You were overly attached to your mother. There was some domineering mother. There was a weak father. There was all this sort of stuff. Actually, there's no evidence to support that. It's just not supported. Far more well supported is the idea that you come into this world, and some of us who come into this world have a slightly different sexuality than others. You're non-mainstream, So it's really a continuum. It's like a scale of variation. And at that point, obviously, my reading expanded enormously into all the other sources that I could really find, and here we are, basically. That yes, I absolutely think that. In the main, Blanchard was 100% right. I do think that most Western expressions of male to feminine trans, just use that term trans there, are caused by autogynephilia. And I think it's just a bit unfortunate that most people who are actually autogynephilic really reject this idea. I'm not entirely sure that's helpful. Not all, absolutely not all. I mean, there are a lot of very honourable exceptions, and Dr. Anne Lawrence would be one. But unfortunately, the ones who make the most noise in public seem to be the ones who don't accept Blanchard, but they have no other explanation. That's the trouble. There's no supportable evidence that could possibly stand up the so-called feminine essence theory. It's unfalsifiable. I mean, I can't say to you, prove to me how you feel. Mm-hmm. I mean, what does that mean? There's no way I can do that, because the actual premise is not falsifiable. There's no test I can do that would be able to let me know whether what you were interpreting as your own impression of yourself was true or not. It's just not possible. And it's even, all we can really say is, well, I know how I feel. That's it. But I don't even really know what I feel like. How do I know that what I feel like is what other men feel like? The only way you can tell that is by behaviors, not by, airy-fairy impressions and things like that. Men do tend to behave in certain ways. Women do tend to behave in certain ways, and they're not the same. And that is a measure that we can actually use, because it's observable. It's a lot of people in science, unfortunately, and even in psychology, particularly since the 1950s, have kind of lost a little bit the basis of biology. Biology is based in observation. I mean, that's what Linnaeus did. He looked at things and said, well, that is obviously related to that, because apart from some tiny little detail, it looks exactly the same. And, the Linnaean taxonomy, it's been around since 1600 and odds, is the fundamental basis of our understanding of biology. Darwin the same. Darwin bred pigeons, and he went to the Galapagos, which I can never say, and he looked, and he drew, and he developed an explanation from his observations. Personal observation is really key. When people from the non-life sciences, shall we say, like physicists and chemists and people like that, come into this debate, they often think that you have to be able to produce the same standards of proof that you can in physics. I couldn't, but somebody somewhere out there can definitely prove that E does equal mc squared, But that level of proof within the life sciences is just never present. All you can look at is that group have all these things in common, and that group there have all those things in common. And that's basically how it's done, So the idea that, we can't always test to the level that a physicist would like, but you still can't have things that are completely unfalsifiable, because that essentially is just opinion. I mean, anybody could. I mean, and that's the joke that always goes around, which is puerile. But I can self-identify as Napoleon Bonaparte. I mean, that is puerile. But the point that's being made, it's reductio ad absurdum. It's just taking a particular premise to the completely ridiculous. But if a person says, a male person says, I feel like a woman, well, what does that mean? I mean, what does it mean? And how would he know? How would he know what it is to feel like a woman? It's like, I can't get my head around
asking that question. Right? That's why this whole thing's falling apart, because people are starting to ask that question and realizing it's not really substantial when you scratch the surface of the theory.
I would like to make it clear, if I may, that I'm definitely not against HSTS. I'm definitely not against sexual inversion. I'm definitely not against. I am pro giving anybody who falls into these categories supportive support, and that they should be treated exactly the same way as everybody else. I'm not against AGBs. I disagree with some of the things they say, but I'm not like, let's get rid of them. But still, I think people have to accept realism. And in the last, since what? Really over the last 10 years, the realism has vanished because we had a new phenomenon which came through, which is largely a political one, right? And is a function really of left-wing politics, where people said, well, we can just get rid of gender altogether, and I can say I am whatever I like. And there's 167 genders, and there's I don't know how many different sets of pronouns and all the rest of it. It's all complete nonsense. It doesn't relate to actual physical phenomena at all. It's purely political. And I don't think we should be making judgments or decisions that affect everyone on the basis of people's that kind of political views. I mean, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being left-wing. You argue your case. I'm a conservative. I'll argue my case. But when you say that, no, you cannot argue this case because this group is protected because of ideas that have about themselves which are not falsifiable and which cannot be proven, then actually, to me, that's like, no, you're actually destroying free speech and democracy by doing that. Especially when you say, no, you're not allowed to criticize that. When you get people banned off Twitter or banned off Quora, both of which I have been, for simply saying, restating the science as it is published, because it challenges the ideas of certain groups of people.
And it's also doing a disservice to the people who have that experience, not understanding where their feelings and motivations are coming from.
I absolutely believe that's the case. I think that my partner is HSTS. If you've seen her picture, I don't know if you have or not. You probably have if you.
I have online. I think I've seen a picture of you both.
You have?
Yeah.
You haven't? Yeah.
I think I have. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, she's a girl. In every part of our relationship and in her appearance and her comportment, she's a girl. And for someone, she's made that effort all her life, and it is demeaning to someone like that for someone just to say, no, gender doesn't count. I'm a girl now. And it turned like, bad with names. Anyway, doesn't matter. There are cases where men with, shall we say, very masculine body patterns and shapes who like to wear nice three-piece suits. Nevertheless, Dave Moscato is the one I was thinking of, actually, who likes to say, no, I'm a woman. And you just have to accept me as a woman because I say I'm a woman. And it's like, I don't think so. I genuinely don't think so. I don't mean Mr. Moscato any harm by saying that. I just think he's wrong. And I don't think that it's acceptable for people who think like that to then say, well, no, you can't say that I'm wrong because I'm in a protected class. I think that where that gets us is into very, very troubled waters. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think gender is a very complicated issue.
It is very.
And I do think that the standard model as it's understood in the West is how could I put this? Well, it's extremely rigid. And it's not really clear to me that it's fit for purpose, because the standard expression in the West is, right, you have two genders, which is true, you have masculine and feminine, right? But you have also associated to that, you have two gender expressions, which in the West are man and woman, okay? Now, let me bring you to the East for a moment, because I haven't been wasting my time here. If you come to, actually anywhere outside the West, the gender expressions are not man and woman. They are man and not man, right? Because men is a very tightly, strictly policed group. There are a whole range of behavioral controls that ring fence how a man can behave. And if he doesn't behave, he's out. He's not considered a man anymore. And if you're not a man, then what you are is a not man. And the not man group is centered around women, absolutely, and mothers, but it does include people who in the West would be considered, gender non-conforming or non-binary and all that. They just fall into this other whole bunch of gender expressions which are not men. And so actually what happens is you have two genders. You have men and not men. But within the not men group, you can have any expression you like. It's completely unpoliced. There's no It doesn't matter what you do because you're not trying to be a man. You're not in the man group. Now, a lot of people will say, oh, gosh, how patriarchal, how awful. But actually, that really is how it works, And in any traditional society, you'll see this model in operation, certainly in operation all across the Southeast Asia. I'm Scottish. In Scotland, it was certainly in operation in rural Scotland until my childhood. It's operation all across South America, which I know from my researches in the 15 years ago. It's the way that people see things. They don't think it's even surprising. And that's why, for example, they're usually called ladyboys because, I'll explain that because some people don't like the term. In the Philippines alone, there are 179 recognized languages, and they all have different words for the thing we're talking about. So everybody just says ladyboy, okay? Because it just gets ridiculous. Try to remember 179 different bloody words for the same thing. And then you take it across the region where there are more different languages, it's more different words, so everybody uses the term ladyboy. Ladyboys do not think that they're women, right?
How do they make sense? How do they make sense of themselves?
Feminized males. They're non-masculine males. That's what the term actually means. For example, the local term here is Bakla. Bakla just means an unmasculine male, right? And so that can be, you're not masculine because you dress as a woman, or you're not masculine because you like to have receptive, penetrative sex with men, neither of which would be considered acceptable for a member of the men group. So non-masculine male. And so they don't have a problem with that. They don't see themselves as women. And most of them, I came across this first in South America. Most of them, if you say, well, they would laugh at you if you said, are you a real woman? They say, no. Anybody who thinks that's crazy. You're obviously not a real woman. The primary qualification for a woman in this culture, and again, this might be offensive in the West, is that she's either a potential mother or already a mother. Right? Now, that's something that no ladyboy can ever do. No Bakla can ever be a mother. And they know that. So it's like, no. Mothers are very much revered here. This is, goddess culture is really strong in Southeast Asia, just as it is in South America. It's very, very strong. So, people almost think that it's a patriarchal culture, but it's not. It's actually a matriarchal culture. It's just that that men tend to play the roles which have to do with contact with the outside world.
Okay.
The patriarchal culture looks out, men look out the way. Women, they're focused on themselves, their babies, and they look in the way. So it's more introspective. And so in the West, people never think that if you go down to well, we're kind of in between two villages, but if you go to either of those villages during the day, there are no men, and the whole place is being run by women. It's just run by women. And the men do as they're told. When they're in the woman's space, the home space, they behave. They behave according to the rules set by women. And I'm afraid that is actually a matriarchy, whether they like it or not. And its function is protection of children.
Okay.
That's why it exists. Dr. Peggy Reeves-Sandy, I can't remember her university, but she's well published. She's written a lot about this regarding a group called the Minangkabau, who live in Indonesia. And she's well worth reading. Peggy is right on the money. She's studied and understood very well what she's seeing. And it's just something that you find everywhere, basically outside the West. The West has kind of got completely messed up. And maybe we could spend long enough discussing why it got messed up. But it's not the case elsewhere. In fact, there was, I think she's gone dormant, but there used to be a wonderful writer who published on, I think it might have been Blogspot, called Appalachian Lady. I don't know her actual name. And she, according to herself anyway, is, I hope, one of the Hatfield clan, the Hatfields and the McCoys, right? And the famous feud between these two. Well, she's a Hatfield. And she talks about the nature of the structure within the family and how the women were in charge. And she'd say a son would never deny his mother. Sons, generally speaking, go on with their lives. But if mother said, I need you to do this, they would never refuse. It would be like a real mark. It would be so disrespectful and dishonorable for them to do that. They would never do it, you know. And I suspect that people don't realize how much power that is in the hands of women. You know, the women are it's like we control the home group, and the guys, they go out and have feuds with each other and shoot each other and all the rest of it. That's their business. But the trouble is that when you come along and look, what you see is the men. And you have to be here a good while before you start to realize, wait a minute, these guys may be more obvious, but they're not actually running the show. They're actually, the really important people are the grandmothers. Because the not men group is centered around mothers, and the most experienced mothers are in charge of that group. And they are the grandmothers. They're called the Lolas here, but that's general. It's absolutely general across most of the non-Western world.
Are there also masculine gay men, or are most gay men there feminine?
Okay, right. There's a clear, it's a good question, which I will try to explain. There's a clear social class divide. Sorry, next door starting. They're doing some work next door. There's a clear social class divide between, if we talk about traditional, maybe we could say working class society, then nearly all homosexual males will be feminized in some way or another, right? They will just be that way. There will be either what we call femboys, which is, they might kind of make a stab at wearing male clothes, but it's not convincing anyone. You cannot believe how cute some of these boys can be. It's like, for God's sake, that's a male. But I'd have nothing against, they're fine, they're nice people. And that goes from that point, goes through at a scale of variation to you get totally convincing trans women who just are trans women, and that all happens within the, shall we say, the traditional working class social groups. And you will very, very rarely see masculine gay men within that group. You also will not see the Western model of AGP, which is the elderly transitioning form, in that group either. AGPs in this group we're talking about here, the lower social class, they transition at 16, age 16 to 21, right? Which is completely different from the Blanchard model, which was median age 43. Here, as soon as they get the feelings, I like hanging around with girls. I like to look like a girl. I feel good that way. Bang, they'll go, right, fine. I need the hormones. I need to realize this. I need to do it right away. And that's why so many Asian autogynephiles are pretty stunning women, because they started hormones at 16, and by the time they're 25, it's wow. You've got a 5'10" catwalk queen in front of you, and they are pretty dynamic. The other social group, the middle class social group, is completely different. A lot of those in the Philippines are called Philams because their families are part American, part Filipino, or they sometimes live in America. They certainly have American ideas, middle class American ideas, and this is also replicated in places like Thailand, Indonesia. So they have these American ideas, and within this group, it's very interesting. The standard expression of the homosexual male is what is called here the macho gay, right? And they're bodybuilders. Their bodies very into their physique. They're very really quite in your face, And actually, the other type don't like. They really don't like them, but that's not something we need to get into. And at the same time, strangely enough, the model of autogynephilia that you find in that social group conforms better to the Western model, and in that they transition later. And this seems to all have to do with basically social pressure. Within the traditional group, I wouldn't like you to go away with the wrong impression here. I mean, a father who finds out that his son is gay, that's the term they will use, right? Or Bakla, may well be extremely angry. We're talking about a working class traditional father, and he may beat the child. I mean, I have heard stories that really would, my hair is grey, but they would turn grey. The beatings are way beyond anything that would be considered acceptable. I mean, it would get you prison in the West. if you treated a child that way. Beatings, thrashings. Kevin Ballot, who is a famous Filipina beauty, a Bakla, a lady with transworld, she was chained up in the yard of her home by her father and beaten like a dog. And her father admits that. He's admitted that on public interview. I think they're still on YouTube. This sort of thing is normal. So it's not like it's like, oh, it's fine. But here's the thing. The mother is highly likely to be completely accepting. And the mothers will gather around and try to protect the child from the excesses of the father's anger. Mothers quite often buy for their Bakla daughters, that is, boys who are transitioning, they'll buy hormones for them. Because you can buy it, you see here, no gatekeepers here. You can just go down to the corner shop and buy contraceptives. The corner shop is like 50 yards from here. It's got them on the counter. And anybody can buy it. You don't need a prescription. You just buy them. And it's like, what, $1 for, a pack of 21. So they normally take 3 a day. So a dollar a week. The costs are like nothing. And nobody polices this. Nobody says, oh, you've got a prescription. If you went to a pharmacy, they'd say, are you sure you're 18? But at the corner shop, they go, that's for your mother, is it? That's okay. Do you know what I mean? It's like, everybody knows what's going on, but it's just like, forget it. It's not a problem. Let's just do it. So I kind of lost the thread of your original question there, but the fact that it is much more general for boys to be feminized in the traditional or working class group doesn't mean it's completely easy for them. It's easier, but it's not completely easy. Whereas in the middle class group, boys in these cultures will have their futures planned out, largely by their mothers, while they're still in elementary school. And, if you want to be a lawyer, if you want to be a doctor, if you want to join politics, if you want any sort of high-powered job, you can't be a ladyboy. You can't be a feminine male. Even if you're homosexual, you have to be masculine about it. You have to play the role. You have to act in that way. And so they are under very strict, strong social pressure that even if they did want to follow a trans path, follow the path of Bakla had, they can't really do it. It's not possible for them because of this intense social pressure, which is much more like what happens in the West. And the same is true for AGPs. I mean, AGP always sets on at puberty. I mean, we know that now. Blanchard didn't know that, but we do know now that it does. It sets out. It's when they a thing called Tanner stage 4, which is a phase of childhood development, and it's at the point at which basically boys start to masturbate. That's when AGP, if it's going to happen, that's when it manifests. So by the time Jenner was, because that was 65, that transition, he'd been aware of his autogynetic feelings for over 50 years, and he'd been suppressing them. Like, no, I can't do that. I want to be an Olympian. How can I be an Olympian if I've got boobs? And I'm prancing around in an evening dress. It just doesn't work, And people are not stupid, especially AGPs tend to be quite bright. And so they go, right, no, okay, I just have to conform to what people expect of me. Today in the West, you're seeing a little bit of a change there because the West has become much more open towards male expressions of femininity, which has been really was originally driven by gay males, but has been jumped on by AGPs, especially young ones, saying, no, it's okay, I can do it. Nobody can say that I'm wrong. And we're talking about people of the ages of sort of 14 to 16.
Yeah.
I can do that now, and society will not completely stamp on me in the way that it would have, not that long ago. And they felt they really had to suppress. I certainly know, 3 girls in the West quite well who are AGP, but they appeared in that manner. They were all on hormones by the time they were 16. Mm. And, they're pretty convincing girls now, really. I mean, they might be a little bit bigger than the standard issue, for their ethnicity, but
What are the
looking at them,
options for the Ladyboys
wouldn't be
as
like,
far as like a livelihood? And because you said, I mean, it limits your progress socially to be a gay male
in that group
or a
it does.
ladyboy. Yeah. So what are there options for
Well, you know, within the this is applicant throughout Southeast Asia, right? But I will talk about the Filipino example. In the Philippines, you have a thing which I call kabaklaan, right? Now remember, they've all got a different word for bakla. It just happens to be that where I live in Luzon, the word is bakla. That means a ladyboy, an unmasculine male. Now that is everything. That is a university. It's a finishing school. It's a route to career. It's everything that you could possibly want that will propel you through life. So you might, if you are a Bakla, you'll be spotted by the other Baklas in the local group in the barangay or village, and they will gently encourage you. Your mother might encourage you towards them. Well, you go and speak to that girl. She's a lovely dancer, you know. And you're a nice dancer. Why don't you try that? That might be your thing. So they'll go along and they'll learn a few dance moves, and you know, and it kind of naturally, organically flows into it. And their career paths after that will be things like an awful lot of them will go into the beauty industry. You know, there'll be beauticians or hairdressers, cosmetologists. Strange word, but there you go, cosmetologists. A lot of them will be models. You would be surprised how many models in Southeast Asia on the fronts of magazines are actually ladyboys. They're not female at all. And I could come back to a minute for why that is, but let's go on. The other big one is pageants, because you can make a living being a pageant queen here. You know, you can actually make a pretty damn good living being a pageant queen. And the girls who are successful in pageants are generally AGP because they're tall. And they will move around the pageants around the Philippines. There are hundreds of pageants in the Philippines. And the girls will move from pageant to pageant. And that way they can make quite a civilized living, you know. They're sought after as models because now not all, it would be unfair to say all, but most Southeast Asian women are fairly small. The average height for a woman in the Philippines is 5 foot. That's the average, right? And trust me, you'll meet a lot shorter than that. And pear-shaped. You know, they have small boobs, big hips, very, very curvy legs, very shapely legs, and cute, pretty faces. You know, magazine designers, and I used to be a photographer. I know this. They famously, what they like is the model that is best seen in the West, where they're tall, slender, with beautiful rather than pretty faces. You know, sometimes with quite large boobs, and generally speaking, with quite slender hips. Right, that's maybe changing a bit in the West, but here it's still slender hips. Now the ladyboy fits that exactly. She's perfect. She walks into the casting studio and it's like, yeah, that one, that one. And I don't care how you started off. You're the one I want for this photo shoot. And so they can be very successful as models because they exactly fit what the art directors are looking for. You know, it's like, yes, that's what we want. And all these cute little, you know, which is, I mean, I'm not saying that these women are not attractive and they're not feminine. Of course they are. But it's just, you know, having worked with art directors so much as I did, you know, an art director gets an idea in his head or her head, and you ain't going to shift them, you know. And it's always the same. It's always this tall, lissom, willowy, curvaceous, strikingly beautiful, but not pretty. There's a difference between pretty and beautiful. You know, Amazon almost, that he wants or she wants for the cover of the magazine, and they always want that, you know. And so that's how that happens. So that is for the best looking girls. That's a big career avenue. The other one is entertainment generally. Philippines and Thailand are full of comedy bars, and quite often the acts will be autogynephilic ladyboys. They're not particularly good looking, but they can be extremely funny. The biggest light entertainment star on Filipino television is a person called Vice Ganda. Vice Ganda used to be a pageant queen, but is now, well, yes, she's the biggest light entertainment star in the country. It's AGP. And everybody knows that she's a Bakla. She makes jokes about it, and this is on lunchtime television every single day in the Philippines. You cannot get away from baklas in the Philippines. They're everywhere. The air is absolutely full of it. Finally, just to finish that issue of career for and this is a really attractive one, is not so much in the Philippines, not so much live sex prostitution. That's really not a big thing for baklas in the Philippines. There's a reason for that I could come to. But distance, that's a big thing. They can hook Western guys online and get the Western guys to send them money. And this is an industry. Literally, Aaron, this is an industry where what they do, they call it cam sex, but it's not really even that much sex. It's mainly they're sitting chatting to men, lonely men in the West, and they're being that man's dream girl online. And he's sending them, I don't know, he's maybe sending them a couple of $100, $300 a month, sometimes a lot more. But if you've got 5 guys and they're each sending you $300, well, that's $1,500 a month, and $1,500 a month in the Philippines is a lot of money. That is a very healthy income. The president of the country makes $70,000 a year. You know what I mean? So if you're making $1,500 and you're living in a barangay where everything is really cheap, and your accommodation probably costs you like $1,000 a month, or you're staying at home with your mum, this is like serious money. And it's very, very attractive to these girls. So what do? What is it about these girls that attracts men? Their beauty. So it's like, yeah, I've got to make myself more feminine. Yeah, I've got to make myself more beautiful. Yes, I've got to, this is the market. That's what I have to do. And they spend, as one writer put it, they spend inordinate amounts of time and money on beautifying themselves. And they really do. And this is this is not a new phenomenon. This has been going on for a very, very long time. So that's really very different from what you would see in the middle class group, where it tends to be professional careers in business, careers in the law, academia, all that sort of thing. That's a completely different social circle.
Are most ladyboys taking hormones, cross-sex hormones? Like, do most of them take medical steps
Right.
to stay to maintain a feminine appearance?
Practically all.
Yeah.
Nearly all ladyboys will be taking or have taken hormones at some stage. The hormones they're taking will almost certainly be, at least in the initial stages, contraceptive pills, which, by the way, folks, is not ideal. It's not a great idea, but it does work. They're very strongly feminized preparations. And they will start taking them, in the case of HSTS, they probably start usually around about the age of something around about the age of 12, 10 to 12. And for AGPs, about 15 to 16, they'll start taking hormones. And they'll just keep taking them.
Does the general population there kind of see a difference between the two varieties, the HSTS versus AGP? Is that just something that's understood within the niche trans culture, but the broader culture doesn't know the difference, just like how it is here? Is that the case?
It's not even understood within the niche trans culture. If you're considering trans culture to mean the same thing as I would describe as kabaklaan, which is the way of the Bakla, that's not really. You see, kabaklaan, the social expression Bakla, right, which is the unmasculine male, is actually a nexus, and it unites several different forms together. See, so people say Bakla, and they're not really interested in how you got to be a Bakla, and you get. What the culture will see, what they will say, is they'll talk about batang baklas, which roughly equates to HSTS. They were kids, they were girls when they were 5. They run around with towels on their heads to simulate hair, and wearing their sister's makeup, you name it. And that at the age 4, 5 younger. And that's the batang baklas. And the other group would be what they call late bloomers. And these are the ones who appeared in mid to later teens, in adolescence. You do have to be a wee bit careful with that, because within some families where there hasn't been any support for the child, you can find HSTS really suppressed until they leave school, and then bang, that's it, right? So they're not AGP, they're still HSTS, but they're actually a minority. Most late bloomers are AGP. And they're easy to spot the difference. You just put one next to the other. You go, yeah, I know which is which. It's really easy. It's not. People in the West often think these are complicated things, but once you've been here for a while, the tricky bit in the Philippines, excuse me, the tricky bit is actually spotting an HSTS. Because you could be standing right next to one and thinking that she's a girl. It's far easier to tell the difference between someone you know is HSTS and someone who's AGP. But just spotting an HSTS, very few Westerners could do it. I'll give you a quick anecdote. Years ago now, this would have been, 2016. I was with a particular girl who was lovely. And we went to see some other girls because I'm always interviewing ladyboys. The more ladyboys, right, I'll interview them. So this was a bunch of girls living in San Fernando, and we went to see them. So as you do, I'm the walking wallet in these situations, right? I pay for everything. I pay for the drinks, the meal, and it never comes to much. It's like $30, and that'll feed a squad of ladyboys, no problem at all. They'll all be quite happy. So, and you get a good night out of it, And it's not a sexual thing. It's just, it's just fun. So we're in this bar, and we're busy having food, as you do, a couple of drinks and some, I don't know what, deep fried crabs, little baby crabs, And this guy wanders over. He was Australian, see. And he saw me because Westerner, my hair wasn't quite as long. I'd just been lazy about going and find a bloody hairdresser that's open, He saw me, all right, I got to talk to the white guy, see. So he sort of saunters over, and you could see what he was going on in his head. This is a white guy, and he has 4 girls with him. That's absolutely unfair because I'm a white guy and I don't have any girls, right? So maybe I can just insert myself into this company and get lucky here, and they think that guys don't realize what they're doing. Anyhow, he starts off, still standing up, he starts off, da-di-da-di-da, and then he starts on about ladyboys and how much he hates them and how much he thinks it's really wrong that they pass themselves off as girls, and they just deceive men. And my girlfriend, Jelly, she says, because Jelly was a very forthright girl, she still is, I'm sure, and she wouldn't stand for no shit from nobody. She turns around and said, hey, wait a minute, I'm a ladyboy. And of course his face went, and the next girl says, yeah, I'm a ladyboy too. And so the other two went, yeah, wait a minute. We're ladyboys also. And this guy, you would have thought that he wanted the ground to open up, just make him vanish and go away. He was absolutely crushed because he had absolutely believed, he was standing telling, I can always tell a ladyboy, I always know what they're like, And that was 4 that he didn't get in one go, if you know what I mean. He just didn't clock him. And that's normal. But I say you could be standing right next to one and you wouldn't know. And one thing you've got to understand about an HSTS Bakla is that she's always after the guy, right? Girls aren't, unless they're prostitutes. That's a different thing. But we're not talking about prostitutes. You're talking about ordinary girls. A Bakla will be making signs to the man that let him know that she's interested. In a way that a natal woman just wouldn't do that. This is a conservative society. This is Catholic conservative society. Girls don't go around making eyes at men. That's not how it's done. There are ways to get, but that's not done that way. But Bakla,
it seems like the HSTS, they're still quite male in their sexual appetite.
It's a partly true point. I mean, I have to say, I've known some women, natal women that is, with pretty powerful libidos. Seriously. Who once they were, it's more that initial contact, where a lady in these cultures, girls are meant to be demure, okay, and a ladyboy finds it very, very difficult to be demure. If she sees a man and she wants him, and it will show in her face. You will know right away that she's interested, and that's a pretty good clue that the person you're looking at isn't actually a woman. Because in these cultures, like I say, I'm not talking about in high prostitution areas. I'm talking just about ordinary girls. Ordinary girls, you have to meet them in a family context. And I have dated natal women here, and they arrive with 3 chaperones. Right? It's just a completely different thing from the West. I don't know if you ever remember, you ever saw a film called Good Morning Vietnam with the lovely Robin Williams, in which she dates a Vietnamese girl who's actually a very famous Thai actress. And they actually have a date, and she arrives with her entire family, 12 people. That's what happens. That's what it's like here. You date a woman and she'll arrive with a squad. If you date a ladyboy, a trans woman, it used to be a little bit more relaxed. It's not so much now, but sometimes they would just arrive alone. But if they came with a friend, it wouldn't be too many. You know, it would be another ladyboy, usually. I don't know if you know about the Jennifer Lowdy story. You know about Jennifer Lowdy story? Jennifer Lowdy was a trans woman who made the mistake of getting in tow with a US Marine. Pemberton, he was called, private first class Pemberton. And he had sex with her, because they later found a gun, so we know. He had sex with her, then discovered she was a trans woman and beat her to death and killed her. And since that happened, when that happened, ladyboys became an awful lot more careful about meeting Western men. In this country, I don't know, it's not maybe so much the case in Thailand, but certainly in the Philippines. You know, I don't date anymore. I've been in an established relationship for the last 4 years. I don't date, but certainly it became, they wouldn't meet you alone on the second date. Absolutely, yeah, that's not a problem. But because the first date is just to make sure that you're not a murderer. You know, you're not a ladyboy killing freak, and they were right to do it. I mean, I used to say to girls, if I was saying let's go for dinner, and I would say just bring a friend. If you feel at all, you know, just bring a friend. I don't mind, and they usually would, and it would usually be another ladyboy.
Do they tend to get married at some point, or do they tend to stay single for their lifetime?
Very few ladyboys get married. Do you mean to men?
Mm-hmm.
I presume you mean. Mm-hmm. This happens to very few ladyboys, unless they can meet a Westerner. You know, a Westerner will marry a lady, but a local guy won't. Really won't. It's very, very, very unusual for a local guy to marry a ladyboy. I mean, they will have sex with them. Fred Whittam, the American researcher who was working in the Philippines in the 90s, he did a lot of surveys on this, and he came up to over 75% of men, I'm talking about straight men, had their first sexual experience with a Bakla, with a ladyboy. Right? And to understand that, you need to understand that female virginity in the Philippines and across the region, this is not just the Philippines, is protected. It's not like the West. A girl is expected to be a virgin when she goes to the marriage bed, right? Women here don't take contraceptives, especially unmarried women, because it's insisted like she's having sex. And she's not supposed to because she's not married, right? So that makes ladyboys very attractive to randy young men and randy old men too, because they are available. And, you know, males, I kind of shocked myself when I found this out, but it's true. Males don't have virginity. It doesn't exist. And certainly in cultural terms, doesn't exist. It's just a nothing. So whereas a woman's virginity is like, you know, you take the wrong woman's virginity and her cousins, brothers, and aunts, and all the family, the male members might well come after you with shotguns. You know, seriously, especially if you do that in a Muslim area, you might well end up dead. Not kidding. But male virginity, who cares? It's just a boy. Doesn't matter. So if the boy is cute and pretty and willing, and the boys love it, because after all, they adore the attention, the gratification that it gives them, the validation that it gives them, all that kind of stuff. They're not going to say no. They're right up for it.
Do many of the ladyboys there get surgery, or is that an option for them?
Yes, certainly. It's when we're talking about surgery, there are two types. There's purely cosmetic, right, which many ladyboys will have. That will be things like chin reshaping, nose jobs, which I wish they wouldn't do. There's nothing wrong with our bloody noses. They'll have maybe a little tucks. They'll have mild cosmetic surgery. You know, nothing too serious. Usually just what's called facial feminization surgery. That's one kind of surgery. They'll have boob jobs. That's very common. They really do like, not all, but most really like to have a nice pair of handfuls. You know what I mean? They're not so enthusiastic about genital reconstruction. Right? We'll just call it GRS, and it is genital reconstruction, which is the installation of a neo-vagina. And there are a number of reasons for that. But of the trans women I know, which is hundreds, and that I've interviewed, talked to over the years, it's not even 5%. Definitely not. 2% maybe have had surgery. 2-3%. That's about it. And the rest, it's not because they can't afford it. They certainly can. You'd be surprised how much money some ladyboys make, especially if they're doing the shall we call it, cam relation thing with a Western guy. You know, he'll pay for their surgery. You'd be amazed how much money men will give women, you know, just by saying, oh, you know, I really would like that, you know. It would really complete me. And you know, I could be a complete girl for you, you know, what do you think? You know, and the guy goes, okay, here's $7,000. That literally happens all the time. So the girls could have these things. They could easily afford the surgery. They just don't do it because they don't want it. Right? They do not want it. And the reason comes back to that thing I said earlier. They know they're not women. They know they're not women. So what would the flipping point be? You know, I mean, okay, so I can go down the beach with my my bikini bottom on and nobody will notice the baggage. Is that enough to go through all that? You know, most of them will go, nah. I'll just tuck a bit tighter. Wear 2 pairs of underwear. You know, they'll wear 2 pairs of bikini shorts, bikini bottoms, so that it all tucks in nice. They don't have the cultural. See, in the West, there's this idea that you can be a trans woman, right? That you could be a woman if you do something like have that surgery. There is no Bakla on the planet who thinks that. There's no Katoi who thinks that. There's no travesti in South America who thinks that. They all think that people who think that these people, these males, can actually be women are stark, raving, bongy. They really do. And they'll tell you that. Oh, don't be stupid. You know, no, I can't be a woman. Why would I do that? You know? And they have to think about, well, what happens if it doesn't work out right now? GRS is quite a developed surgery, and it's usually successful, but it's not always successful. What happens if they lose the ability to orgasm? They are not interested in that. There's no cultural pressure on them here, as there would be in the West, to move towards that kind of surgery, because nobody's going to think they're more complete as a woman if they have it. They're not going to think they're more complete, and nobody else is going to think they're more complete, because everybody knows they can't be real women. You know, that divide is not, it's a line that cannot be crossed here. And I think that one of the problems that the West has got now is that some people have pretended that you can cross that line, and it's bollocks. Excuse my French. It's nonsense. The gender binary is fundamental. But it's the binary that I described earlier, men and not men. Right? And ladyboys are very, very enthusiastic about being in the not men group. That suits them down to the ground, because as a not man, they are a legitimate target for men. There is no, for example, there is no ladyboy. Katoi, Waria, you know, it just depends where you are. Same in Latin America, who considers her sexual partner to be gay. They will not date gays. If the guy shows any sign of a desire to be penetrated, that's it. He's history. Not only is history, history, she'll tell everyone else so he can't find another girlfriend. He's kind of backtracked a little bit because he moved his politics. It happens. There's a researcher called Professor Don Kulik, and he's a professor at the University of Uppsala in Sweden. And he became quite a voice in the queer theory mob in the around about 2010. But prior to that, he did a seminal survey, a study on, in Brazil, they're called travestis. It's the same thing, slightly different in detail, but basically the same. And he lived in a house full of travestis for a year, and they wrote a book about it called Travesti, funnily enough. And he describes the kind of things that travestis would do to their boyfriends. I mean, they would actually beg the boyfriend. They would say, "No, let me try it. I want it. It's not fair. You always do me. Why can't I do you? Let me try. Come on. Let me do." If the guy was stupid enough to let them do it, that was it. He was finished. History.
Just like an entrapment situation going on here.
Absolutely. They're constantly testing. And another thing that
who wants to live really like that?
I've got to watch what you're doing here, which means he would be gay, and you cannot be a gay. Not allowed to be gay. That's completely. I mean, I know that's offensive to a lot of people in the West, but that is exactly how it is in these cultures. It's like, no, not having any gay guy for a partner. No. I want a real man. And yeah, I know that these are things that the West no longer really accepts or believes in, but it's still the way it is everywhere else.
Are you finding the Western ideas about gender, like queer theory, is that starting to? Are you starting to see some of that there?
No.
No.
No. I'm starting to see some of that in the middle class group because it's so influenced by American ideas. But within the traditional group, no, absolutely not. They have no traction whatsoever. And actually, this makes there's a Filipino academic called Neil Garcia. Neil's getting on, he's my age. And he's a gay guy. And for 25 years now, he's been ranting on about the situation in the Philippines, how awful it is, because they won't accept the Phil-Am model, the Western model, which he has, right? And they just won't do it. And they still won't do it. And he's still fuming. It's made no difference at all. It's like, they're not having it. There was an organization called STRAP founded a few years ago. I guess getting on for 15 years ago now. And that was the Society of Trans Women of the Philippines. That was it. And that was all about, trying to get the Western model of trans women, but brought in here. And it was all very, made a lot of noise and all the rest of it. And it didn't make any impression at all. It now is reduced to a single Facebook page, which the last time I looked, hadn't been updated in over a year. It's just faded away because the traditional society has no space for it. You have so many rewarding career opportunities and life paths available because of Bakla that why would anybody follow the Western? They know they're not going to be doctors and lawyers. They just know it. They're not going to do that. They have to find another way. And the performance of beauty, which is really what this is about in this case, that affords them that. They can have their dreams. There's a girl whom I know, I wouldn't call her a friend, but she's an acquaintance, called Rui Mariano. And Rui was an international beauty pageant queen, and she's HSTS. She's one of the most beautiful women I have ever seen in my life. And I have seen a few beautiful women, and she's utterly stunning. She couldn't have done it any other way. She's still, Rui must be 30 or 31 now. And she runs a cosmetics company. She sells hormones. She does all that sort of thing. And she's doing very nicely indeed. She's a businesswoman. And you can certainly be a businesswoman and be a Bakla. But middle class career avenues are not only closed off to these people, but they don't really want them. It's like, no, we can't do that anyway. We are of the wrong class. We're not educated enough. We can't do that. We don't have rich families who will send us to posh schools. If they go to university, it'll be something like University of the Philippines, which is a state school. It won't be to one of the high-end ones that are associated with Ivy League schools in America. So, and that's how you get to be a successful lawyer in this country, is you go to school like that. So it's not, they know from a very early age that, dad works on building sites, or he has a garage, or he's a trike driver, something like that. And they just want better than that. They just want better than that. And they know that beauty can give it. They know that. They're not stupid. They know that the performance, go on. Yeah, sorry.
They outgrow the beauty at some point, right? So what does the aging process look like here? So if you don't have Go on.
It's a really fascinating question. It's a great one, actually. That's a beauty. They outgrow. They don't. For a start off, HSTS sexual inverts mature, masculinize very much more slowly than most males, right? And it is widely believed, Ray Blanchard's been looking at this, that this might be something to do with damage which is done to the androgen receptors in the body at some point in during pregnancy, like before birth, and that these effects mean that the androgen, and I happen to concur with this, the androgen receptors are just not efficient in the way that it would be in most men in the HSTS. So they tend to stay very feminine looking. But then there's the pills. The pills actually, what causes aging really is testosterone. You know, women until they, and if you're taking estrogen and a testosterone blocker, then your looks will stay. They will really stay. I mean, I know girls in their 40s now, and they still look absolutely great. Older than that, they look fantastic. As long as they're kept trim, you know, they're kept in shape a little bit, and they've crucially maintained their hormone regime, then, you know, these are very good-looking women. In terms of aging, right, now some AGPs, for example, will, because they're they're a lot more masculine than HSTS anyway. If they've been a bit sloppy with their hormone regime, or maybe they're just not really quite so convinced that they can do it anymore, then around about age 35, they might just come off hormones and revert
back it in. Okay.
You know, they pack it in, yeah. But they've had 20 years by that stage, during which time they might well have been pageant queens. They might have had a hell of a life, you know. And then suddenly they go, no, okay, I really am a man, actually, and I would like to have kids. And that point at mid-30s is really important for men, because that tends to be when they go, if they're going to have kids, it's like, I really need to start thinking about this. So that's
it's almost like the opposite trajectory as in the West with the AGP.
Well, we're talking about, yeah, absolutely. But we're talking about within the traditional group, right? And they will have presented at 60 and started taking hormones around about then. So they've really come to the end of their trajectory at that point. And it's by no means all of them. There are still plenty of AGPs going forward from that age who they've become so invested in the life that they have that they can't change it. They wouldn't want to. It's fine. They got a nice house, you know. They got the rewards that they wanted, and so they're quite content. So why would it change? It's $1 a week, you know, for the pills. Nothing. Some girls will have a thing called a transatlantic split here. I don't, because you're Canada, I don't know which one it is. Called orchiectomy or orchidectomy, in which they'll basically have the testicles removed. It's castration. And they'll have that done fairly young. It's not that common, but I do know girls who've had it done. And more girls than who have had, you know, vaginoplasty. And that permanently stops the masculinization. That's it. It will never occur. They do need to keep taking the estrogen, otherwise they will just have no libido at all. Plus, there are, you know, potential consequences of osteoporosis if they don't take something. You know, you need some sex hormones. Yeah. But they'll just have them lopped off, going, and that's it. I used to know a girl who was the AGP. We kept hers in the freezer, and she would show people. Look. I'm not joking. That's absolutely true.
It just goes to show how strong that AGP drive is, knowing that they really change social class, really, by no longer being seen as men in their culture. For an AGP who is a heterosexual male with AGP, that they have to give up their whole sex class in order to, but not only their sex class, but their whole social status in order to be seen as women in that society.
You know, for a long time, researchers in the West thought that AGP was very rare in the Philippines and in Southeast Asia generally. That's absolute nonsense. There's absolutely loads of them. But within the middle class, they're very rare, exactly for that reason. You know, you've got somebody who's got a career, banking, lawyer, doctor, academia. And he knows perfectly well, especially this is not the USA, especially in a culture like this. If he was to show up to work one day in a dress, everybody would go, what do you think you're doing? You think we're going to let you go and teach students looking like that? It ain't going to happen, so they don't do it. And that is why, there was a real confusion going on, because people were looking for AGPs in the wrong place. You look for them within traditional working class culture. In middle class, they're as rare as they once were in the West. It just doesn't happen because they hide. They keep it all under wraps, under control, and they might well be, cross-dressing to pleasure themselves in private, or to indulge their it's a fetish. It is a fetish. Indulge the fetish in private, but they ain't going to tell anybody. There's no way they're letting that out, because that would compromise their entire lives, their career, everything. And unlike the West, where people are encouraged, just do it. Doesn't matter if you lose your wife, lose your home, lose your job, lose everything. And they do it in the West. And it's tragic. I think that's awful. It's awful that they're encouraged to do it. Here, they're not that stupid. They know what the result would be. They ain't going to do that. They will not do it. They will just go, no.
It sounds like they wouldn't really be validated as women there in the same way that they are here either. I mean, if the two categories there are men and not men, they can opt out of manliness, but they'll never be validated as women there.
No, never. Can't happen. It doesn't happen. And I'm actually frankly surprised that it happens at all in the West. I mean, a few minutes reflection should tell you this is not a possible scenario. You simply cannot change. You're always going to be XY. Sex can't be changed. Sex is determined at the point of conception. That's it. That doesn't stop you being a highly feminized male who adores men and who, is all that stuff and is beautiful. And some of them are extremely beautiful. But it really does constrain you. You can't. There are avenues that are just not open. You can never be in this culture. You can never be a Lola, because you can't be a grandmother. So you can never be one of the. You can never rise up the hierarchy of women. Cannot happen. The only way that a trans woman, if you like, a Bakla, ladyboy, can gain status is through money, right? And that is why you'll find they do things like when they start out, if they're successful, they'll be buying their parents. Well, sometimes they'll buy a house for their parents. Sometimes they'll just finish the half-completed wreck that their parents have been living in for the last 15 years because they ran out of money. That's very common. They might buy a tricycle. It's a motorcycle and sidecar outfit for their dad. They might do this sort of thing, because that shows to the society around them how well they're doing, and it gives them status. And that's one reason why, in the West, Blanchard's not the only student of this in the West, obviously, but he found that live action prostitution was quite rare amongst AGPs, but that was really to do with his sample that he was looking at. Nutbrock didn't find that quite so strongly. Here, for an AGP, that's what gives the prostitution the interest. It's not just that she can afford the surgeries and the things that she wants to make her, for her body goals, they call them their body goals, to be achieved. It's also her social goals. You can remember one of my exes, Christy, and she was very instructional for me because she was AGP, and I didn't realize that because I thought they were all the same at that time, And I was quite involved with Christy for a while. And she said, that she had not been accepted by her father. And her father was what they call a bystander here. He was a construction worker, but he was in his 50s. And you can't, there's no market for 50-year-old construction workers in the Philippines. It just isn't. All the construction workers, the ones they want are all 20. Because they're young and fit and energetic, and they know perfectly well that the 50-year-old guys are all leaning on their shovels, smoking cigarettes. They're not actually working. So, that's what they think. So she said that my father just wouldn't accept me. Terrible, wouldn't. And she was a late bloomer. She didn't come out when she was a kid. But But when I went to Japan, she went to Japan with a dance troupe, and of course the pay was terrible, but you can make really substantial amounts of money from, servicing Japanese gentlemen. I said, when I went there and I got money, then he accepted me. Of course, because she's sending the money back to him and he's buying bottles of booze and cigarettes. And, he's able to say, oh, look, I've got all this stuff. And that, that's Christopher. He always called her Christopher, much to everybody's horror. That's Christopher does that, sends me this money. So she got validation. So he accepted her. I mean, I was shocked by it. I thought that was really horrifying. I'm a parent. I couldn't, good grief. It seems so shallow, but I now know that is normal here. That is absolutely normal. Parents, fathers just will not accept a Bakla son, right? Just they will not do it. But if that Bakla son becomes rich or is successful in some way or has something else that they can give them, yeah, that's okay. That's all right. You might still hate the fact that she's a Bakla, but it don't matter. I've got a new house. I've got a new tricycle. You know what I mean? And it does. It's one of these things that you feel it's creepy. You know what I mean? As a parent, I find that very creepy. But that is nevertheless.
They have full knowledge that the money is coming from prostitution.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Anyone who goes to any Bakla who goes to work, anyone who goes to work at a dance troupe in Japan is assumed to be a prostitute. Automatically assumed to be a prostitute. No way around that one. A curious thing is that within the top level of pageant performance and beauty contests, that is, and that area here, and of being a cabaret entertainer, stuff like that, at the very top level, they don't prostitute. It's a bit like the geisha situation, you look but you don't touch, But when they go out of sight away to Japan, yeah, that's a completely different story. What they're expected to do here is a totally different thing from what they do over there. Out of sight, out of mind. And yeah, it's absolutely expected that it's understood that if you go to Japan to work with a dance group or a cabaret company or anything like that, yeah, that's what you're going to be doing. You're going to be servicing men. And they give the Japanese, I have heard stories that are like, really? There's one case where a Japanese paid a girl just like that in a bar, right? One night in a bar, paid for a girl's boob job. There you go. Here's the money. Go and get yourself some boobs. Just like that, she didn't have to save it. He just said, here, have it. I like it. Go on, you'll be better with boobs. There you go. So that's what, that's several $1,000s, just like that. Within Japanese culture, spending shows status. Mm-hmm. Right? The more you spend, the higher status you are. So if you're in a bar full of ladyboys and there's competition between the males, because there's always competition between males, and you want to rise above it, there you go. Pull out $3,000 from your pocket and just, there you are. You just have that. I don't care. It's only $3K. Who cares? I beat that, basically. Basically, that's what it is. And in Japan, that's really, because the Japanese men are really competitive. That's what the whole thing's about. They spend huge amounts of money on these girls, and they're not afraid to spend for beauty. If the girl's beautiful, then she can make a truly amazing amount of money. Given that you're talking about somebody who has no education, quite possibly didn't even finish school.
Yeah, to be handed that kind of money. It's fascinating to hear about all of this from a different culture's perspective.
You can't take what's happening here and translate it to the West.
No.
It just can't be done. But the thing I find kind of annoying is the way that, not you, but that many people in the West think they can take Western ideas and just translate them to here. Well, you can't do that either. That doesn't work. Western notions about virginity and sexuality and all the things and what it is to be a man and a woman, all of these things, they have no meaning here. They don't. Mm-hmm. There's a completely different set of values that are in operation. And that's why, you've got this crazy situation in the West where you've got people saying there's like 167 genders. I don't know what the latest count is. No, those are actually all not men. They're all part of the same gender. It's just a variation. One group is extremely homogeneous. The other group is very varied and multifaceted. Simple as that. But there are political reasons why such a pragmatic view is not popular in the West, I'm afraid. And political reasons are not always the best reasons, They really aren't. And that's leaving aside all the stuff about, but who's going with whom up the woods. And as I say, this is all happening. This isn't white guys. White guys don't come here to do this. This is something that's happening within the local population. There's definitely records. If you read into the history of this, there are definitely records of white men. They used to come here and do that. But I think since the 90s, that's become extremely rare. It's certainly, I've never encountered it. Never, just not once. But then this will interest you. As they get older, the Baklas become expected to pay the men for sex.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely. If a guy asks the Bakla out for dinner with the assumption that there'll be sex, then the Bakla will be expected to pay for dinner and also give him something for the sex. Absolutely true. Yeah, that happens a lot. That is the way, because local men will not pay a Bakla for sex. They won't do it. The Bakla has to pay that. And that's why there's really no market, because the Western tourist market just isn't big enough here. It's not like Thailand. It's not like Thailand. Thailand is a very much more developed tourist market. I think I found the whole experience really fascinating, and the amount that you learn about, you learn a hell of a lot about your own culture when you look at somebody else's, and you start to look back at my own culture and go, how the hell does that fit this? And it's been very interesting. It's been really educational, the whole thing.
Thanks so much, Rod, for
sure. Yeah, that's fine.
With us. It's been fascinating to hear about this
thank you.
Perspective.
Well, if you're interested, then there's an awful lot of information on my site and also in my videos. I don't just talk about ladyboys and transgender and sexuality. I talk about a lot of things because I'm a journalist, and anything that I find that interests me, I will write about. So do go and have a look.
Will do. I have checked out your site.
I always like it when people buy my books.
Well, thank you so much.
You're welcome, Aaron.
Take care of yourself.
Good to meet you too. Take care.
You as well.
Bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of the Transparency Podcast. If you enjoy our content, please help out our algorithm by hitting like or subscribe. If you'd like to make a donation, follow the link to our PayPal account. On behalf of the Gender Dysphoria Alliance, thanks for your support.